Life has a way of breaking us in ways we never imagined possible. The people who are supposed to help us heal often feel just as lost as we do. When 12-year-old Lila arrived at her great-uncle Ray's house in a wheelchair, neither of them wanted to be there. The car accident had changed everything for Lila. Ray had been alone since his wife died 3 years ago. His golden retriever Daisy had grown quiet and distant, just like her owner. Lila was angry at the world. Ray didn't know how to talk to a hurting child. The small town felt empty to both of them. But one morning, Daisy did something she hadn't done in months. She walked over to Lila's wheelchair and gently placed her head on the girl's lap. It was a simple moment that would change everything. What happens when a grieving man, a wounded child, and an old dog find each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drive to Ray's farmhouse had taken 3 hours through winding country roads that seemed to lead nowhere. Lila's parents sat in the front seat, speaking in hushed tones they thought she couldn't hear. Her mother's voice cracked when she mentioned the physical therapy bills. Her father's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter each time they discussed how long this arrangement might last. "It's just temporary," her mother had said for the 10th time that morning. "Just until we figure things out." Lila stared out the window at the passing fields, her wheelchair folded in the back beside suitcases that held what remained of her old life. 6 months ago, she had been training for the regional track meet. Now she couldn't feel her legs, and every conversation around her seemed to revolve around money they didn't have and futures that had been permanently altered. The farmhouse appeared modest and weathered, with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch that had seen better decades. A golden retriever lay on the porch steps, barely lifting her head as the car pulled into the gravel driveway. The dog's coat had lost its luster, and her movements were slow and deliberate as she retreated to a corner of the porch. Ray emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was taller than Lila remembered from family gatherings years ago, but he had grown thinner. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his flannel shirt was clean but faded. The lines around his eyes spoke of recent grief, and his smile seemed forced as he approached the car. "Lila," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness that didn't quite mask his uncertainty. "It's been too long." Her parents helped transfer her to the wheelchair, a process that had become routine but never less humiliating. Ray watched with the careful attention of someone who understood physical limitations but had never dealt with them in a child. His eyes lingered on the medical equipment and adaptive devices that had become part of her daily existence. "Let me show you around," Ray offered, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure how to make his home accessible for someone in her situation. The interior of the farmhouse was clean but sparse. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, most featuring a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Ray noticed Lila's gaze lingering on the largest photo, his wedding picture, and quickly looked away. Dust had settled on the frame and the flowers. Beside, it had been dead for weeks. "That's Martha," he said quietly. "My wife. She passed 3 years ago." The living room opened into a kitchen with worn linoleum floors and cabinets that had been painted over multiple times. Ray had clearly made some hasty preparations, moving furniture to create wider pathways and removing small rugs that might catch wheelchair wheels. But the house still felt designed for people who could navigate stairs and reach high shelves without thought. "Your room is on the main floor," Ray explained, leading them down a short hallway. "I moved some things around to make space." The bedroom was simple but clean, with a twin bed positioned low enough for easier transfers. A small dresser sat against one wall, and Ray had installed grab bars near the closet. The window looked out over a large backyard that stretched toward a barn. in what appeared to be a vegetable garden overtaken by weeds. "The bathroom is right across the hall," Ray continued. "I had a contractor put in some safety features last week. Raised toilet, shower seat, those kinds of things." Lila's parents exchanged glances. Her father cleared his throat. "Ray, we can't thank you enough for this. We know it's a lot to ask." "Family helps family," Ray replied, though his voice carried the weight of someone who hadn't had to care for another person in years. "We'll figure it out as we go." The golden retriever had followed them inside and now lay in the hallway, watching the proceedings with mild interest. Her tail gave a half-hearted wag when Ray looked her way, but she made no effort to approach. "The newcomers. This is Daisy," Ray said. "She's getting on in years, but she's good company. Mostly keeps to herself these days." Lila's mother knelt beside the wheelchair. "Honey, I know this is hard, but Uncle Ray is going to take good care of you and will call every day. This isn't forever." But as her parents prepared to leave, everyone in the room understood that nothing about their situation felt temporary. The medical bills weren't going away. The insurance battles would continue. And Lila's care required resources and attention that stretched beyond what her parents could currently provide. The goodbyes were awkward and rushed. Her mother cried quietly as she hugged Lila, and her father promised to visit soon, though they all knew the 3-hour drive would make regular visits challenging. Ray stood on the porch, one hand resting on Daisy's head, as the car disappeared down the gravel road. That first evening, they sat at the kitchen table in relative silence. Ray had prepared a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables, and he served everything on plates that had clearly belonged to Martha. The portions were generous, but neither of them had much appetite. "I'm not very good with kids," Ray admitted, cutting his chicken into precise pieces. "Martha was the one who understood young people. I mostly worked with animals." "I'm not really a kid anymore," Lila replied, her voice carrying a bitterness that made Ray look up from his plate. "No," he agreed quietly. "I suppose you're not." Daisy lay on her bed in the corner of the kitchen, occasionally opening one eye to check on them. The dog had shown no particular interest in Lila since her arrival, treating her with the same polite indifference she seemed to show most visitors. "She used to be more social," Ray explained, noticing Lila's gaze. "Before Martha got sick, Daisy would greet everyone who came to the door. She loved children, especially. But after Martha died, she just seemed to lose interest in people." "Maybe she knows they'll leave," Lila said, pushing vegetables around her plate. Ray paused his eating. "Maybe so." The silence stretched between them, filled with the ticking of an old clock and the distant sound of evening birds. Both of them seemed to be waiting for something: guidance, connection, or simply the end of an uncomfortable day. "I set up a television in your room," Ray offered. "And there are some books on the shelf, if you're interested. Martha loved to read." "Thank you," Lila replied, though she made no move to leave the table. As darkness settled over the farmhouse, they established the rhythm that would define their early days together. Ray would clean the kitchen, while Lila maneuvered her wheelchair through the limited accessible spaces. They would exchange pleasantries about practical matters and retreat to their separate corners of the house, each carrying the weight of circumstances neither had chosen. But on that first night, as Lila transferred from her wheelchair to the unfamiliar bed, she caught sight of Daisy through the open bedroom door. The old dog had raised her head and was watching Lila with an expression that seemed almost curious. For just a moment, their eyes met across the hallway, and Lila felt something she hadn't experienced since the accident: the possibility that someone might understand what it felt like to have lost the life you once knew. The nightmare came in waves, as it had every night since the accident. Lila found herself back in the passenger seat of her father's sedan, watching the rain streak across the windshield. The truck ran the red light in slow motion, metal crushing metal, glass exploding inward. But in the dream, she could still feel. Her legs could still brace herself against the impact that would steal her ability to walk. She woke screaming. The sound echoed through the quiet farmhouse, sharp and desperate in the darkness. Within seconds, she heard movement in the hallway, Ray's heavy footsteps, and the clicking of Daisy's nails on the hardwood floor. Light spilled into her room as Ray appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his eyes wide with concern. "Lila? What's wrong?" She was sitting up in bed, her hands gripping the sheet so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool night air, and her breathing came in short, panicked gasps. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't separate the dream from reality. "I can't," she began, then stopped. How do you explain to someone that your own mind betrays you every night, replaying the moment your life split into before and after? Ray stood uncertainly in the doorway, clearly out of his depth. His hands moved awkwardly at his sides, as if he wanted to offer comfort, but didn't know how. Behind him, Daisy had settled in the hallway, her golden head resting on her paws as she watched the scene with intelligent eyes. "Was it about the accident?" Ray asked gently. Lila nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Martha used to have nightmares too," Ray said, taking a tentative step into the room. "Near the end, when the cancer was bad, she'd wake up thinking she was drowning. I never knew what to do to help her." The admission surprised Lila. Ray had mentioned his wife only briefly since her arrival, and always in practical terms. She hadn't expected him to share something so personal, so vulnerable. "What did you do?" she asked. "I stayed with her until she fell back asleep. Sometimes I'd read to her or just talk about ordinary things. The garden, the weather, what we might have for breakfast. It seemed to help her remember where she was." Ray moved closer to the bed, his movements careful and respectful of her space. "Would you like me to stay for a while?" Lila considered his offer. Part of her wanted to be alone with her fear and anger, to nurse her wounds in private, as she had learned to do over the past months. But another part of her, a part she had almost forgotten existed, craved the comfort of another person who understood loss. "Okay," she whispered. Ray settled into the chair beside her bed, the same chair Martha had probably used during her illness. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them, but somehow it felt appropriate rather than painful. "Tell me about before," Lila said after a few minutes of silence. "Before Martha got sick." Ray's face softened at the memory. "We had a good life here. Simple, but good. Martha taught third grade at the elementary school in town, and I ran a veterinary clinic out of the barn. We talked about having children, but it just never happened for us. Martha poured all her maternal instincts into her students and the animals I treated." He paused, his gaze distant. "She had this way with hurt creatures. Didn't matter if it was an injured bird or a sick cow, she could calm them just by being present. She always said that healing started with helping them feel safe." Lila pulled her knees up to her chest, a position that had become impossible since the accident, but which her body still craved for comfort. The movement reminded her sharply of her limitations, and she felt tears beginning to form. "I used to run," she said suddenly. "That's all I wanted to do. Run track in high school, maybe get a college scholarship. I was good at it, really good. Coach said I had natural talent." The words tumbled out in a rush, months of suppressed grief finally finding voice. "I had this medal from the state qualifiers. I kept it on my nightstand because I was so proud of it. Now it's just a reminder of everything I'll never be able to do again." Ray listened without trying to offer false comfort or empty reassurances. His presence was steady and patient, the way Martha might have been with a frightened animal. "Where is the medal now?" he asked. "In my suitcase. I can't look at it, but I can't throw it away either. Would you like to show it to me?" Lila hesitated, then wheeled her chair to the dresser, where she had hastily unpacked her belongings. The metal was wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of her suitcase, hidden beneath clothes and medical supplies. She unwrapped it carefully, as if it might shatter at her touch. The gold-plated metal caught the lamplight, its surface engraved with her name and the date of the meet. A red, white, and blue ribbon attached it to a small pin that she had once worn with such pride. "Third place in the 800-meter run," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was my best event. I could pace myself, stay with the pack, then find that extra gear in the final stretch." Ray examined the medal with the same careful attention he might give to examining an injured animal. "This represents something real," he said finally. "A goal you set, training you completed, a race you ran with heart and determination. The accident changed your body, but it can't change what you accomplished. But what's the point now?" Lila's voice cracked with frustration. "I'll never run again. I'll never feel that rush of crossing the finish line or hear the crowd cheering. This medal is just a cruel joke. Maybe," Ray said. "Or maybe it's proof that you have something inside you that doesn't depend on your legs. The heart that drove you to train every day, the determination that got you to state qualifiers, that's still there." Lila stared at the medal, tears flowing freely now. For months, she had been so focused on what she had lost that she hadn't considered what remained. Her parents, doctors, and therapists all spoke about adaptation and acceptance. But Ray was the first person to acknowledge that her identity as an athlete had been real and valuable. "I don't know how to be anything else," she admitted. "Neither did I, after Martha died," Ray said. "I defined myself as a husband, as half of a partnership. When she was gone, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I closed the clinic, stopped seeing friends, just sort of disappeared into this house." He gestured toward the hallway where Daisy still lay watching them. Even Daisy grieved. She used to sleep on Martha's side of the bed, would wait by the door every evening for her to come home from school. It took months before she stopped looking for her. "How did you start living again?" "I'm not sure I have," Ray said honestly. "I exist. I get through days. But living? That's something I'm still figuring out." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who had lost their sense of purpose, finding unexpected kinship in their shared confusion. Outside, the night sounds of the countryside provided a gentle backdrop: owls calling, wind rustling through trees, the distant lowing of cattle. "I should try to get some sleep," Lila said eventually. "Of course." Ray stood to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Lila, tomorrow morning would you like to see the barn? Where I used to work." She looked up, surprised by the invitation. "Why? I don't know," Ray admitted. "Maybe because Martha always said that healing happens when we remember who we used to be, even if we can't be that person anymore." After Ray left, Lila lay in the darkness holding her track medal. For the first time since the accident, the weight of it in her palm felt less like a burden and more like a talisman, not of what she had lost, but of what she had once been capable of achieving. In the hallway, Daisy raised her head as Ray passed her on his way back to his room. For just a moment, the old dog's tail moved in what might have been the beginning of a wag. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it marked the first time in months that Daisy had shown any reaction to the emotional currents flowing through the house. Something was shifting in the quiet farmhouse, something as subtle as the change from night to dawn. The three of them, man, girl, and dog, were all still broken in their own ways, but for the first time, they had acknowledged their brokenness to each other, and in that acknowledgement lay the possibility of something new. Ray noticed it first at breakfast, Lila pushing eggs around her plate without actually eating them. She had managed only a few bites of toast, and the glass of orange juice he had poured remained untouched. When he thought back over the past 3 days, he realized she had been doing the same thing at every meal. "Not hungry?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Not really," Lila replied. which had become her standard response to most questions. But Ray had spent 30 years observing animals, learning to read the subtle signs of illness or distress that creatures couldn't verbalize. He recognized the dullness in Lila's eyes, the way her clothes hung a little looser than when she had arrived. She was disappearing bit by bit, meal by meal. After she wheeled herself into the living room, Ray cleared the table and found himself staring at Martha's recipe box. It sat on the counter where it had remained untouched since her death, a wooden container with a painted rose on the lid that held decades of handwritten cards. Martha had been the cook in their marriage, the one who could turn simple ingredients into comfort and sustenance. He opened the box slowly, as if it might contain something fragile. The cards were organized alphabetically, each one written in Martha's careful script with notes about modifications and improvements. "Ray loves extra pepper in this one," she had written on the beef stew recipe. "Perfect for church potlucks," adorned the chocolate take card dot at the back of the box. He found a section marked Teaching Recipes Simple Dishes. Martha had used to introduce her students to cooking during after-school programs. The cards were more detailed, with step-by-step instructions written for young hands and inexperienced cooks. Ray selected a recipe for pancakes, one Martha had marked as foolproof and fun. He carried the card to where Lila sat staring out the living room window. "I was thinking about making lunch," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "But I'm not much of a cook. Martha handled all the meals around here." Lila glanced at the recipe card in his hands. "What is it?" "Pancakes. Martha used to make them for her students sometimes. Said cooking was one of the best ways to teach math and science without kids realizing they were learning." He held out the card. "The recipe's in her handwriting. I thought maybe you could help me figure it out." Lila took the card reluctantly, her fingers tracing Martha's neat cursive. She had beautiful handwriting. She was particular about that. Said a teacher's handwriting had to be clear enough for any child to read. Ray stood and moved toward the kitchen. "I've got all the ingredients, but I'll probably make a mess of it without supervision." Something in his tone, perhaps the admission of inadequacy or the invitation to be needed, drew Lila from her chair. She followed him into the kitchen, where Ray had already begun assembling ingredients on the counter. "The recipe says to mix the dry ingredients first," Lila read aloud. 2 cups flour, 2 tablespoons sugar, 2 teaspoons baking powder, 1 teaspoon salt. Ray measured each ingredient with the careful precision of someone who usually worked with medication dosages. He had treated enough animals to understand that ratios mattered, but cooking felt like an entirely different science. "Now we're supposed to make a well in the center," Lila continued, "and add the wet ingredients separately." They worked together with the focused concentration of 2 people learning a new language. Ray cracked eggs while Lila measured milk, both of them consulting Martha's recipe card like a sacred text. When Ray's first attempt at flipping a pancake resulted in it folding over on itself, Lila actually smiled, the first genuine expression of amusement he had seen from her. "Let me try," she said, maneuvering her wheelchair closer to the stove. From her seated position, she had better control of the pan, and her second pancake emerged golden and perfectly round. Ray's expression of surprise and admiration was so genuine that Lila found herself sitting a little straighter. "You're a natural," Ray said. Martha would have been impressed. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, Lila handling the flipping while Ray prepared each batch of batter. Daisy had wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the unusual sounds of activity and the smell of food. She positioned herself strategically near the stove, hoping for dropped morsels. "She's been more social today," Ray observed, noting how Daisy had chosen to lie closer to Lila's wheelchair than she typically approached anyone. "Maybe she likes the smell," Lila suggested, though she had noticed it too. The way Daisy's attention seemed more focused, more present than it had been Dot as they cooked. Ray found himself sharing stories about Martha's teaching career and her love for nurturing young minds. She said cooking taught patience and following directions, but also creativity and problem-solving when things went wrong. Like when you folded the pancake in half? Lila asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Exactly like that. Ray flipped another pancake successfully, grinning with pride. She would have said it was a learning opportunity. When they finally sat down to eat, both of them had worked up genuine appetites. The pancakes were fluffy and warm, served with butter and maple syrup Ray had bought from a local farm. For the first time since her arrival, Lila cleaned her plate. "These are really good," she said, reaching for seconds. "Martha's recipe," Ray replied. "Though I think you did most of the actual cooking." As afternoon settled into evening, they found themselves lingering at the kitchen table longer than necessary. Ray had made coffee for himself and hot chocolate for Lila, and they shared the comfortable silence of people who had accomplished something together. "Tomorrow," Ray said eventually, "would you like to try something else from the recipe box? Maybe something for dinner?" Lila nodded, already looking forward to it. What else did she teach her students to make? Ray opened the recipe box again, shuffling through the cards. "Let's see. There's spaghetti sauce, cornbread, chocolate chip, cookies." He paused at one card. "Oh, and here's one for homemade bread." She wrote a note that it's excellent for building arm strength while kneading. "Arm strength I can do," Lila said, flexing her biceps with mock seriousness. It was such a normal teenage gesture that Ray felt his heart contract with something between joy and sorrow. For just a moment, he could see who Lila had been before the accident: confident, playful, ready to take on challenges. That evening, as Ray cleaned the kitchen and Lila sat nearby reading one of Martha's books, Daisy made her way over to the wheelchair. She didn't quite rest her head on Lila's lap, but she settled close enough that Lila could reach down and scratch behind her ears. "She's got soft fur," Lila observed. "Martha brushed her every day," Ray said. Claimed it was meditative for both of them. "I haven't kept up with it since she's been gone." "Maybe I could brush her sometime," Lila offered, "if she'd let me." Ray looked over to see Daisy's tail giving a slow, deliberate wag as Lila's fingers found a particularly good spot behind her ears. It was the most animated he had seen the dog since Martha's death. "I think she'd like that," he said quietly. As they prepared for bed that night, the house felt different. The silence was less heavy, filled now with the lingering warmth of shared activity rather than isolated grief. In the kitchen, Martha's recipe box sat open on the counter, its contents no longer a painful reminder of loss, but a bridge connecting past comfort to future possibility. Ray paused at Lila's bedroom door. "Thank you for helping with lunch today. It felt good to use Martha's recipes again." "Thank you for letting me help," Lila replied. "I haven't felt useful in a long time." After Ray had gone to his room, Lila lay in bed thinking about the day. Her hands still smelled faintly like vanilla from the pancake batter, and her stomach was pleasantly full for the first time in weeks. More than that, she had felt something she had almost forgotten: the satisfaction of creating something with her own skill and effort. In the hallway, Daisy had chosen to sleep closer to Lila's room than usual, as if drawn by some invisible thread of connection. The old dog's breathing was steady and peaceful, no longer the restless panting of a creature who had lost her purpose. Change was coming to the quiet farmhouse, arriving not with drama or grand gestures, but in the simple act of cooking together, of sharing stories over homemade food, of finding ways to honor the past while building something new. The weekly trip to town had always been a solitary ritual for Ray: a quick visit to the hardware store, the pharmacy, and the small grocery. That had served the community for 3 generations. He had perfected the art of efficient errands, speaking only when necessary and avoiding the kind of lingering conversations that might lead to questions about how he was managing alone. But Lila needed things. Personal items her parents had forgotten. Medical supplies that required regular restocking. And simple necessities that weren't immediately obvious to a man who had lived alone for 3 years. After a week of making mental lists of items she mentioned needing, Ray realized a joint trip was inevitable. "I usually go to town on Fridays," he told her over breakfast. "Thought you might want to come along this time. See what passes for civilization around here." Lila looked up from the bowl of oatmeal she had actually been eating. Their shared cooking experiments had restored some of her appetite. "Is everything wheelchair accessible?" The question caught Ray off guard. In all his years of visiting the same stores and businesses, he had never considered their accessibility. He thought about the 2 steps leading into Henderson's Hardware, the narrow aisles of Miller's Grocery, the steep ramp at the post office that had always struck him as more decorative than functional. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but we'll figure it out. And if places aren't accessible, we'll make them accessible or take our business elsewhere." The fierce protectiveness in his voice surprised both of them. Ray had always been mild-mannered, conflict-averse, the type of person who apologized when others bumped into him. But the thought of anyone or anything making Lila feel unwelcome sparked something defensive in him. The drive to town took 20 minutes along roads that wound through farmland and small patches of forest. Lila sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the familiar landscape of her temporary exile. Ray had installed a wheelchair rack on his pickup truck, and seeing her chair secured in the truck bed made the reality of their situation feel both permanent and precarious. "That's the school where Martha taught," Ray said, pointing to a low brick building surrounded by playground equipment. "She worked there for 15 years. Loved those kids like they were her own." Lila studied the building, trying to imagine Martha among the swings and slides, supervising recess or helping tie shoelaces. Did she ever want to have children of her own? Ray was quiet for so long that Lila wondered if she had overstepped some boundary. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with old grief. "We tried for years. Doctors couldn't find anything wrong with either of us, but it just never happened. Martha threw herself into teaching, said she was mother to 30 kids every year instead of just 1 or 2. "I'm sorry," Lila said softly. "Don't be. She found ways to fill that empty space, and we had a good marriage. But I think it's part of why I never knew how to talk to children. I spent my whole career communicating with animals, not young people." Their first stop was Henderson's Hardware, a local institution that had been serving the community since 1952. Ray parked as close to the entrance as possible, but the 2 concrete steps leading to the door might as well have been Mount Everest for someone in a wheelchair. "Wait here," Ray said, his jaw set with determination. He disappeared into the store and returned a few minutes later with Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 70s who had known Ray and Martha for decades. She took one look at the situation and shook her head. "Ray Thurston, I've been after my son to build a proper ramp for 2 years. Today's the day it happens." She turned to Lila with a warm smile. "Honey, you just wait right there while we bring the store to you." What followed was an impromptu display of small-town flexibility. Mrs. Henderson and Ray carried items out to the truck while Lila provided input from the passenger seat. When other customers saw what was happening, they pitched in without being asked. Within 30 minutes, they had completed their shopping through a combination of description, consultation, and community effort. "You come back next week, Mrs. Henderson told Lila firmly. "That ramp will be finished by Tuesday." The grocery store presented similar challenges, but Miller's had a side entrance that was accessible, though the aisles proved narrow for comfortable navigation. Ray found himself seeing the store through Lila's eyes, merchandise placed too high, checkout counters designed for standing customers, restrooms that met legal requirements, but barely. "It's harder than I thought it would be," Lila admitted. As they loaded groceries into the truck, What is? Being visible. Everyone stares, but they're trying not to stare, which makes it more obvious. And people want to help, but they don't know how, so they either ignore me completely or treat me like I'm made of glass. Ray nodded, remembering his own awkwardness during Lila's first days at the farm. How do you want to be treated? Like a person who happens to use a wheelchair, not like a wheelchair that happens to have a person attached to it. Her clarity on the subject impressed him. At 12 years old, she had developed more self-awareness about her situation than he had, managed in 3 years of widowerhood. Their final stop was the pharmacy, where Lila needed to pick up prescriptions and medical supplies. The pharmacist, Dr. Morrison, had known Ray for years and treated Lila with professional kindness, asking about her medication schedule and any side effects she had experienced. Physical therapy going well? Dr. Morrison asked. I haven't started. Yet, Lila replied. We're still getting settled. Dr. Morrison glanced at Ray with concern. The sooner the better with these types of injuries. Muscle tone, circulation, all of that. I can give you some names of therapists who make house calls if transportation is an issue. As they drove home, Ray felt the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on his shoulders. He had focused on providing basic care and shelter, but Lila needed specialized support he wasn't qualified to give. We should set up physical therapy, he said, and probably look into continuing your education. I know you've been out of school since the accident. My parents tried homeschooling for a while, Lila said, but with everything else going on, it fell apart pretty quickly. Well, we'll figure it out. Whatever you need. As they turned into the farm's driveway, Daisy appeared on the porch, her tail wagging with what appeared to be genuine excitement at their return. She had positioned herself at the top of the porch steps, and when Lila maneuvered her wheelchair to the base of the ramp Ray had installed, Daisy made her way down to greet them. She missed us, Lila observed with delight. She missed you, Ray corrected. I've been making this trip alone for 3 years, and she's never been waiting on the porch when I got back. That evening, as they prepared dinner together using another of Martha's recipes, Lila seemed more animated than Ray had yet seen her. The trip to town had been challenging, but it had also proven that she could navigate the world beyond the farm, even if that world wasn't perfectly designed for her needs. Mrs. Henderson was nice, Lila said as she stirred pasta sauce. And Dr. Morrison seemed to really know what he was talking about. Small towns have their advantages, Ray replied. People look out for each other, remember your name, care about your story. Is that why you and Martha stayed here instead of moving to a bigger city? Ray considered the question while he set the table. Martha grew up here. Her family, her friends, her whole life was rooted in this place. And I found that I liked the rhythm of it, the way seasons determined your activities, the way you knew your neighbors' stories, the way help appeared when you needed it. As they ate dinner, Daisy positioned herself between their chairs, closer to the table than she had ever been during Martha's lifetime. Ray noticed the change, but didn't comment, not wanting to jinx the dog's gradual emergence from grief. Tomorrow, Ray said, I'd like to show you the barn, where I used to run my practice. Is it still set up for animals? Everything's still. There. I just locked the door and walked away after Martha died. Haven't been back since. The admission hung in the air between them. Ray had shared more about his grief and avoidance than he had intended, but something about Lila's direct questions and honest responses made confession feel natural. Why tomorrow? Lila asked. Because I think it's time, Ray said simply. For both of us. After dinner, they sat on the porch as had become their evening custom. The spring air carried the scent of blooming apple trees and the sound of birds settling in for the night. Daisy had followed them outside and now lay stretched across the porch boards, her body forming a bridge between Ray's chair and Lila's wheelchair. The town newsletter mentioned that Mrs. Patterson's cat had kittens, Lila said, reading from a weekly publication that seemed to chronicle every birth, death, and minor controversy in their small community. Martha always wanted to get a kitten, Ray mused. Said Daisy needed a companion. But I worried about how Daisy would react, whether she'd be jealous or territorial. What do you think now? Ray looked down at Daisy, who had raised her head at the mention of her name. Now I think Martha was probably right. Daisy's got room in her heart for more than just grieving. As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Lila found herself looking forward to tomorrow's exploration of the barn. The building had loomed mysteriously at the edge of her vision since her arrival, its closed doors hiding Ray's professional past and perhaps offering clues about how they might build a future together. "Ray?" she said as they prepared to go inside. "Yes? Thank you for taking me to town today, and for not making me feel like a burden." Ray paused in the doorway, struck by the maturity in her voice and the weight of gratitude that seemed disproportionate to such a simple kindness. "Lila," he said quietly, "you're not a burden. You're family. And family takes care of each other, no matter what." It was the first time either of them had used that word family to describe their relationship. It hung in the evening air like a promise, fragile but full of possibility. As they made their way inside the farmhouse that was slowly becoming home, the barn stood 50 yards from the farmhouse. Its red paint faded to a rusty brown that spoke of years exposed to weather and neglect. Ray had avoided looking directly at it for so long that approaching the heavy wooden doors felt like visiting a grave he had been too cowardly to tend. "I built this clinic in 1985, he told Lila as they made their way across the yard, a wheelchair, navigating the uneven ground with careful precision. Martha helped me design the layout, insisted on windows in every room so the animals wouldn't feel trapped." The padlock on the door was stiff with disuse, and Ray's hand shook slightly as he worked the key. When the doors finally swung open, afternoon sunlight streamed into a space that had been preserved exactly as he had left it 3 years ago. A core monument to a life he had abandoned in his grief. The main room housed examination tables of varying heights, designed to accommodate everything from hamsters to horses. Medical equipment sat under dust covers, and cabinets lined the walls with supplies that had likely expired long ago. But the space felt alive despite its abandonment, filled with the ghosts of thousands of animals Ray had treated and the countless hours he and Martha had spent working side by side. "It's bigger than I expected," Lila said, maneuvering her wheelchair through the wide aisles Ray had designed for easy navigation. "How many animals did you see in a day?" "Depended on the season. During calving and foaling, I might not come home for days, but usually maybe 8 to 12 appointments, plus emergency calls." Ray moved to one of the examination tables, his hand resting on its familiar surface. Martha kept the books, managed the appointments, assisted with surgeries. She was better with the nervous animals than I was. In the corner of the main room sat a smaller examination area with a lower table, clearly designed for companion animals rather than livestock. Lila wheeled closer, examining the careful organization of instruments and supplies. "What's this area for?" "Dogs, cats, the occasional rabbit or bird." Martha's favorite part of the practice. She said farm animals were practical patients, but pets were family members who needed extra gentleness. As if summoned by their conversation, Daisy wandered into the barn, her nose immediately beginning the complex work of cataloging 3 years' worth of accumulated scents. She moved with more energy than Lila had yet seen from her, tail wagging as she rediscovered familiar territory. She used to spend every day here, Ray explained. Had her own bed in the corner, knew which animals needed space and which ones craved attention. Best assistant I ever had. Lila watched Daisy explore, noting how the dog's entire demeanor had changed inside the barn. She remembers this place. Animals have longer memories than people give them credit for. Daisy probably associates this space with feeling useful, having a purpose. They spent the next hour exploring the clinic's various rooms. Ray showed Lila the surgical suite, still pristine under its protective covers, and the recovery area where animals stayed overnight. In Martha's office, her calendar still showed appointments for the week she had become too ill to work. "Why did you stop?" Lila asked, studying a wall covered with photos of Ray and Martha with grateful pet owners. "After Martha died, you could have kept going." Ray was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a photo of Martha bottle-feeding an orphan calf. "I told myself it was because I couldn't manage alone, that Martha had been too integral to the operation. But the truth is, every animal I treated reminded me of her. Their trust, their vulnerability, the way they depended on me to help them heal, it all felt connected to her." "So you just walked away?" "I just walked away," Ray confirmed. "Referred my clients to other vets, donated supplies to the animal shelter, locked the doors, and pretended this part of my life had never existed." Lila wheeled closer to the photo wall, studying the images of Ray in his element, confident, skilled, surrounded by the animals he had dedicated his life to helping. The contrast with the withdrawn, uncertain man she had first met was striking. "You look happy in these pictures," she observed. "I was happy. Martha and I built something meaningful here. We helped creatures who couldn't help themselves, eased suffering, celebrated new life. It was good work." A soft mewing sound from outside interrupted their conversation. Ray frowned, moving toward the open barn doors, with Lila and Daisy following. The sound came again, weak and plaintive, from somewhere near the woodpile behind the barn. "Stay here," Ray said. But Lila was already maneuvering her wheelchair around the building's corner. They found the source of the crying wedged between two fallen logs, a small orange kitten, maybe 6 weeks old, covered in dirt and clearly injured. One of its hind legs bent at an unnatural angle, and its breathing was labored. "Oh," Lila breathed, her heart immediately engaged by the tiny creature's distress. Ray knelt beside the woodpile, his veterinary instincts overriding 3 years of avoidance. His hands moved with practiced gentleness as he assessed the kitten's condition, checking for obvious injuries while speaking in the soft, reassuring tone Lila had never heard him use with humans. "Broken leg, definitely. Possible internal injuries. She's dehydrated and probably hasn't eaten in days." Ray looked up at Lila. "Her mother was likely killed by a predator or hit by a car. This little one crawled here looking for shelter. Can you help her?" Lila asked, though she already knew the answer from the way Ray's expression had sharpened with professional focus. "I can try, but I'll need to set up the clinic again, and she'll need round-the-clock care for the first few days." "I can help," Lila said immediately. "I don't sleep well anyway, so night shifts wouldn't bother me." Ray studied her face, seeing a determination there that reminded him of Martha's fierce protectiveness toward vulnerable creatures. "Are you sure? It's a lot of work, and there's no guarantee she'll survive." "I'm sure," Lila said firmly. "What do we need to do first?" What followed was a crash course in emergency veterinary medicine. Ray carried the kitten into the barn while Lila wheeled alongside, offering suggestions and assistance as he uncovered equipment and began the familiar ritual of preparing for treatment. "First, we need to stabilize her," Ray explained, his hands moving with muscle memory as he set up on 4 lines smaller than anything Lila had imagined possible. Fluids, pain medication, antibiotics to prevent infection. Lila watched in fascination as Ray transformed from the uncertain, grief-stricken man she knew into someone completely competent and assured. His movements were economical and precise, his voice calm and authoritative as he explained each step of the treatment process. "The leg will need to be set and splinted," he continued, gently palpating the kitten's tiny limb. "It's a clean break. which is good. But she's so small that everything has to be scaled down. The dosages, the equipment, even the surgical techniques. How do you know what dose to give something so tiny? Math and experience. Weight-based calculations that become second nature after a while. Ray prepared a syringe with a dose that looked impossibly small. Martha always said treating kittens and puppies was like performing surgery on living dolls. Everything miniaturized, but just as critical. As the pain medication took effect, the kitten's distressed mewing quieted to soft purring. Ray worked to clean her wounds and set the broken leg, his large hands surprisingly delicate as they manipulated the tiny splint. "She's purring," Lila observed with wonder. "Cats purr when they're in pain, not just when they're happy," Ray explained. "It's actually a healing mechanism. The vibrations promote bone growth and tissue repair." Daisy had positioned herself near the examination table, watching the proceedings with intense interest. When the kitten mewed softly, Daisy's ears perked forward, and she made a soft whining sound in response. "Daisy wants to help too," Lila said. "She's always been maternal with babies," Ray replied, securing the splint with careful wraps of medical tape. Martha used to joke that Daisy thought every young animal was her responsibility. By evening, the kitten was stable and sleeping peacefully in a small recovery cage Ray had set up near the barn's heater. Her breathing was regular, and she had managed to drink a small amount of milk replacer from a dropper. "What happens now?" Lila asked. "Now we wait and see if she's strong enough to heal. The next 48 hours will tell us whether we've done enough." As they prepared to return to the house for dinner, Ray took one last look around the clinic. For the first time in 3 years, the space felt alive again, filled with purpose and the possibility of healing. "Thank you," he said to Lila as they made their way across the yard. "For what?" "For reminding me who I used to be. For helping me remember that some things are worth fighting for." That night, Ray made the first of many trips to check on their patient. But he wasn't surprised to find Lila already there, her wheelchair positioned beside the recovery cage, reading aloud from one of Martha's books in a soft, soothing voice. "Does reading help them heal?" she asked when Ray appeared in the doorway. "Martha thought so," Ray replied. "She said the sound of human voices helped animals feel less alone." As the kittens slept peacefully between them, Ray realized that something fundamental had shifted. The barn was no longer a monument to loss, but a place of active healing. And for the first time since Martha's death, he felt the familiar satisfaction of using his skills to ease suffering and preserve life. The tiny orange kitten had given them more than they had given her. She had provided a bridge back to purpose, a reason to hope, and proof that broken things could sometimes be made whole again. Spring arrived with the persistence of hope itself, transforming the dormant farmland around Ray's house into a canvas of green possibility. The kitten whom Lila had named Penny for her copper-colored coat had not only survived but thrived, becoming a source of daily joy as she learned to navigate the world on 3 good legs and one carefully mended one. "The garden's calling," Ray announced over breakfast, gesturing toward the window where morning light revealed the large plot behind the barn. "Martha planted it every year for 15 years. I let it go wild after she died, but maybe it's time to bring it back." Lila looked out at the overgrown space, trying to imagine the organized rows of vegetables and flowers it had once contained. "I've never grown anything before. Neither had I when Martha first dragged me out there," she said. Gardening taught patience, hope, and acceptance of things beyond your control. Seemed like hippie nonsense at the time, but she was right about most things. The challenge of making the garden accessible for Lila sparked Ray's problem-solving instincts in ways he hadn't experienced since his veterinary days. He spent the morning in his workshop, another space he had avoided since Martha's death, sketching modifications and gathering materials. "The traditional approach won't work," he explained to Lila as she watched him work. Ground-level gardening requires too much bending and reaching. But if we build raised beds at the right height, you can. Work from your wheelchair while I handle the tasks that require standing. The raised beds Ray designed were more sophisticated than anything Martha had used. Built from cedar planks and elevated to precisely the right height for Lila's chair, they would allow her to reach comfortably across their width while providing good drainage and soil depth for healthy plant growth. "These are beautiful," Lila said, running her hands along the smooth wood of the first completed bed. "Much nicer than just planting in the ground." "Martha would have loved them," Ray replied, and for once the mention of his wife brought warmth rather than pain. She always said gardening should be a pleasure, not a chore. They spent the next week preparing the garden space. Ray handled the heavy lifting, moving soil, setting beds in place, installing a drip irrigation system that would make watering easier for both of them. Lila focused on planning and organization, studying seed packets and gardening guides with the same intensity she had once devoted to track training. "I think we should plant things we can actually eat," she said, spreading packets across the kitchen table. "Tomatoes, peppers, herbs for cooking, and maybe some flowers to make it pretty." "Practical and beautiful," Ray agreed. Martha's philosophy exactly. The adaptive tools Ray created for Lila represented the same ingenuity he had brought to veterinary medicine. Traditional garden tools were modified with extended handles and ergonomic grips. A small wagon attached to her wheelchair would allow her to transport supplies without help. Even the seed starting trays were designed to fit perfectly across her chair's armrests. "How do you think of these modifications?" Lila asked, testing a long-handled cultivator that allowed her to work soil without straining. "Years of solving problems for animals who couldn't tell me what hurt," Ray replied. "You learn to observe, adapt, and find creative solutions when the obvious approach doesn't work." Daisy appointed herself supervisor of the garden project, following them between house and garden with the alert attention of someone with an important job. She had claimed Penny as her special responsibility, and the kitten often rode on Daisy's back as they made their rounds, a tiny orange passenger on a golden ship. "They're like a comedy team," Lila observed, watching Penny tumble off Daisy's back and immediately scramble to climb on again. "Martha always said animals choose their own families," Ray replied. Daisy's found her purpose again, being Penny's guardian and teacher. The first day of actual planting felt ceremonial. Ray had prepared the soil with the same attention to detail he had once given to surgical procedures, testing pH levels, and adding organic amendments until the earth was rich and dark. Lila wore gardening gloves Martha had left behind, their fabric softened by years of use. "Seeds first, then transplants," Ray instructed, opening packets of lettuce and radish seeds. That would provide quick gratification for beginning gardeners. Martha always said you needed some fast-growing crops to keep your enthusiasm up while you waited for the tomatoes and peppers. Working side by side in the warm morning sun, they fell into the meditative rhythm that Martha had tried to describe. Ray would prepare planting holes while Lila followed behind, dropping seeds with careful precision and covering them with gentle pats of soil. "It feels hopeful," Lila said, brushing dirt from her gloves. "Like we're investing in the future." "That's exactly what we're doing," Ray agreed. "Every seed is a bet that tomorrow will come, that we'll be here to tend what we've planted." The physical aspects of gardening proved surprisingly therapeutic. For Lila, the fine motor control required for handling seeds provided excellent occupational therapy, while the reaching and stretching involved in tending plants helped maintain flexibility in her upper body. Dr. Morrison was right about the physical therapy, she admitted as they worked on their third raised bed. "I can feel myself getting stronger. Your balance is better too," Ray observed. "You're more confident transferring from your chair to different surfaces. Maybe because I'm not thinking about being disabled when I'm focused on the plants." I'm just thinking about what needs to be done." As the weeks passed, their garden became a daily pilgrimage. Early morning watering sessions with the first cup of coffee. Afternoon weed patrol while Penny stalked grasshoppers and Daisy supervised from her chosen spot of shade. Evening harvest that provided ingredients for their shared cooking experiments. "Look at this," Lila called one morning, pointing to tiny green shoots emerging from the lettuce bed. "They're actually growing." Ray joined her, both of them grinning at the miracle that never ceased to amaze gardeners, the transformation of dormant seeds into living plants. "First harvest in about 3 weeks. Fresh salad from our own garden." "Our garden," Lila repeated, savoring the possessive pronoun. "I like the sound of that." The garden's success sparked plans for expansion. Lila sketched designs for a larger plot next season, including space for climbing plants, berry bushes, and a dedicated herb garden near the kitchen door. Ray found himself looking forward to these planning sessions, energized by Lila's enthusiasm and ideas. "Martha would want us to try her rose varieties," he suggested, pulling out a catalog that had arrived with the morning mail. She had a whole section planned for heirloom roses, but never got to plant them. "We could make that section a memorial garden," Lila proposed. "Something beautiful to honor her memory." The idea felt right to both of them, a way to include Martha in their future rather than leaving her buried in the past. They spent the evening poring over rose catalogs, selecting varieties based on Martha's notes and their own developing preferences. She wrote about fragrance being as important as appearance. Ray read from Martha's garden journal. Said a rose without scent was like a song without melody. As summer progressed, their garden provided more than food and flowers. It became a classroom where Lila learned about soil composition, plant biology, and the complex relationships between weather, timing, and growth. Ray rediscovered the satisfaction of nurturing living things, of using his hands to create rather than simply maintain. "I understand now why Martha loved this," Lila said one evening as they sat among the growing plants. Penny curled in her lap while Daisy dozed nearby. "It's like each plant is a patient that needs individual care and attention." "Exactly," Ray replied. "Some need more water, some prefer shade, some require special soil. You learn to read their signals and respond to what they're telling you." The parallel to his veterinary work wasn't lost on either of them. The garden had become a bridge between Ray's professional past and their shared future, a place where his skills remained relevant and valuable. "When school starts again in the fall," Lila said, "I want to do a science project about adaptive gardening. Show other kids that growing food doesn't require a traditional setup." "That's a wonderful idea," Ray replied. Martha would be proud to know her garden was teaching the next generation. As summer moved toward its peak, their raised beds overflowed with healthy plants. Tomatoes climbed their supports with vigorous growth. Pepper plants set fruit in abundance, and herbs released their fragrances with every touch. The memorial rose section, planted with Martha's chosen varieties, showed promising new growth that would bloom in the following season. "We did this," Lila said with satisfaction, surveying their productive landscape. "We brought this space back to life." "We did," Ray agreed, and in that shared accomplishment lay proof that adaptation and growth were possible. That broken ground could be made fertile again. That hope planted with careful attention could yield abundance beyond imagination. Discovery happened by accident, as the most profound revelations often do. Lila had been helping Ray organize his study, a room that had become a repository for 3 years' worth of unopened mail, unfinished projects, and memories too painful to properly sort. Martha's presence lingered everywhere in the accumulated papers and forgotten tasks. "What should I do with these?" Lila asked, holding up a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They had been tucked behind a stack of veterinary journals, as if hidden deliberately. Ray looked up from the desk where he had been sorting through old appointment books, and his face went pale when he saw what she held. The ribbon had been Martha's favorite color, and the careful way the letters were preserved suggested they held special significance. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I forgot those were there." The letters were addressed to Ray in Martha's careful handwriting, but they bore no postmarks, private correspondence never intended for mailing. Lila could see her own name reflected in Ray's expression, the same curiosity and trepidation she felt about exploring painful truths. "Should we read them?" she asked. Ray's hands trembled slightly as he took the bundle from her. "I suppose we should." Martha never wrote anything she didn't want eventually to be understood. The first letter was dated 2 years before Martha's death, during a period Ray remembered as particularly difficult in their marriage. He had attributed the tension to work stress and never imagined the deeper currents flowing beneath their daily interactions. "My dearest Ray," Martha had written, "I've been thinking about the conversation we had last night, about whether we should stop trying to have children. I know you think I've made peace with our situation, but I need to be honest about the dreams I still carry." Ray's voice caught as he read aloud, and Lila watched emotion play across his features, surprise, grief, and something that might have been relief. "I dream about the children we might have had," the letter continued. "Not the babies we lost to miscarriage, but the older children who would have filled this house with laughter and chaos. I imagine teaching them to garden, helping with homework at the kitchen table, watching you show them how to care for injured animals with your gentle hands." Lila felt her throat tighten with empathy for the woman she had never met, whose longing for family echoed through decades-old words on yellowing paper. "I know you blame yourself for our childlessness," Martha had written, "but I need you to understand that you have given me a full life in every way that matters. We've built something beautiful together. Our work, our home, our love for each other and for the creatures we've helped heal. If children had been part of our story, I would have treasured them. Since they weren't, I've poured that maternal love into my students and into you." Ray set down the first letter with shaking hands and reached for the second. This one was dated just months before Martha's cancer diagnosis, written during what Ray remembered as one of their happiest periods. "I've been watching you with the Henderson's granddaughter when they bring their dog for checkups," Martha had written. "You're so patient with her questions, so gentle when she wants to help hold the animal. You would have been a wonderful father, Ray. Please don't let my inability to give you children convince you otherwise." "Martha," Ray whispered, his voice breaking. "There's more," Lila said softly, seeing additional letters in the bundle. The third letter was the most difficult to read, written during Martha's final months when treatment had failed and they both knew death was approaching. "My darling husband," Martha had begun, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably drowning in guilt and regret. Stop. Please. Stop torturing yourself with what-ifs and should-have-beens." Ray's composure cracked completely, tears flowing freely as he continued reading. "I've watched you practice being alone these past months, preparing to close yourself off from life when I'm no longer here to drag you into the world. Promise me you won't do that. Promise me you'll find someone to care for, some way to use the love that's been stored up in your heart all these years." Lila reached across the space between them and took Ray's free hand, anchoring him to the present, as he navigated the depths of Martha's final wishes. "I know you think our childlessness was a failure," Martha had written, "but what if it was preparation? What if God knew that someday a child would need exactly the kind of love we've been saving up? What if our empty nest was meant to be filled, not with babies we created, but with someone who needed healing we could provide?" The final letter was the shortest and most direct. "Ray, if a child comes into your life after I'm gone, don't run away. Don't convince yourself you're too old, or too set in your ways, or too broken by grief. That child will need you, but you'll need them more. Children have a way of calling us back to life when we've forgotten how to live. Trust that instinct. Trust the love Martha never got to give to her own children. She would want you to share it with someone who needs it desperately. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Ray's quiet weeping and the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time they couldn't recover. Lila sat motionless, overwhelmed by the profound gift Martha had left them permission to become the family they had already begun creating. She knew, Ray finally managed to say. Somehow, she knew you were coming. Or she knew you, Lila replied. She knew you'd need a reason to live again. Ray wiped his eyes and looked directly at Lila for the first time since they had begun reading. I thought I was doing Martha a disservice by caring about you, by letting you matter to me. I thought loving you meant forgetting her. But that's not what she wanted. No, she wanted me to use the love we had saved up together. She wanted our marriage to be preparation for something, not just an ending. They sat together in the study surrounded by the evidence of Martha's wisdom and foresight. The letters had reframed everything: Ray's initial reluctance, his growing attachment to Lila, even his guilt about finding purpose again after years of grief. I understand now why you didn't know how to talk to me when I first arrived, Lila said. You weren't just learning how to care for a child. You were fighting against everything you thought Martha would want, when really caring for you was exactly what she hoped I'd do. Daisy appeared in the doorway, sensing the emotional intensity in the room. She made her way to Ray's chair and rested her head on his knee, offering the comfort she had learned to provide during Martha's illness. Even Daisy knew, Ray said, scratching behind the dog's ears. She started connecting with you before I understood what was happening. Animals are smarter about these things than people, Lila observed. They don't overthink love, they just give it where it's needed. As afternoon faded into evening, they remained in the study, talking through the implications of Martha's letters. The revelations had shifted something fundamental in their relationship, removing the guilt and hesitation that had shadowed Ray's growing attachment to Lila. I want to ask you something, Ray said as they prepared to leave the study. And I want you to answer honestly, even if you think it might hurt my feelings. Okay, do you want to stay here permanently? Not just until your parents figure things out, but as a real home? Lila considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Yes, she said finally, but only if you want me to stay, not because you feel obligated by Martha's letters. I want you to stay because you've brought this house back to life. Ray replied, because watching you grow and heal has given me purpose again. Because Daisy wags her tail when she hears your wheelchair in the hallway. And because Martha's garden is producing vegetables we're gonna harvest together. And because we're family now, Lila added. And because we're family now, Ray agreed. That evening, as they prepared dinner using herbs from their garden, Ray called Lila's parents. The conversation was longer and more complex than their usual. Check-ins involving lawyers, social services, and discussions about permanent guardianship. They want what's best for you, Ray reported after hanging up. It's going to take some time to work through the legal aspects, but they understand that. You found stability here. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? Lila asked. Legal guardianship is different from just letting me stay temporarily. I've been ready since the day we planted our first seeds together, Ray replied. I just needed Martha's permission to admit it. As they sat on the porch after dinner, with Penny curled in Lila's lap and Daisy stretched between their chairs, the weight of the day's revelation settled into something resembling peace. Martha's letters had given them the gift of clarity, the understanding that their unconventional family had been blessed rather than simply arranged by circumstance. Tomorrow, Ray said, I'd like to show you something else Martha left behind. Her teaching materials and books about working with children. I think it's time I learned how to do this properly. You're already doing it properly, Lila assured him. Love doesn't require a manual. But Ray's desire to honor Martha's expertise while building his own understanding felt right to both of them. They had been given a second chance at family, and they intended to make the most of every moment they had been granted. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in late July, interrupting the peaceful rhythm Ray and Lila had established over the past months. Ray answered while Lila tended to the tomato plants, but something in his voice, a tightness she had learned to recognize, made her wheel quickly toward the house. "I understand," Ray was saying, his knuckles white as he gripped the receiver. "Yes, we'll need to discuss this. Can you give us a few days to think it over?" When he hung up, his face carried the expression of someone who had received news that changed everything. "What's wrong?" Lila asked, though she already knew the answer would threaten the fragile stability they had built. "That was your father," Ray said, settling heavily into his kitchen chair. "Their situation has changed. Your mother found a job with better insurance coverage, and they think they're ready to have you come home." The words hit Lila like cold water. Home. The concept felt foreign now, connected to a life that belonged to a different person. The girl who could walk, who lived in a suburban house with parents who were strangers to the daily realities of disability, who had never experienced the quiet satisfaction of harvesting vegetables she had planted with her own hands. "What did you tell them?" "That we needed to discuss it. That any decisions about your future should include your input." Ray's voice carried careful neutrality, but Lila could see the fear in his eyes. "They want to drive up this weekend to talk. Through the logistics." "Logistics," Lila repeated, the word feeling clinical and cold. "Like I'm a problem to be solved, rather than a person with opinions about where I want to live." Ray reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not a problem, Lila. Your family. But legally, they're still your parents and your guardians. I can't make decisions about your future without their agreement." The next few days passed in a blur of anxious preparation and difficult conversations. Ray contacted a lawyer to understand their options regarding guardianship and custody arrangements. Lila found herself cataloging all the ways her life had improved since coming to the farm: her increasing independence, her restored appetite, her growing confidence in navigating both physical and social challenges. "I don't want to go back," she told Ray as they sat in the garden on Thursday evening, watching Penny stalk a butterfly while Daisy supervised with maternal patience. "Not because I don't love my parents, but because this feels like home now." "No," Ray replied. "This feels like home to me too, in ways it hasn't since Martha died." But beyond their emotional attachment lay practical considerations that complicated any legal battle. Ray was 68 years old, single, with no experience raising children and no formal training in disability care. Lila's parents were younger, married, and increasingly stable financially. Any court would likely favor reuniting the family despite Lila's preferences. "There might be another option," Ray said carefully. "I spoke with the lawyer today about something called kinship care. It's a formal arrangement where a relative provides permanent care while the parents maintain legal custody and involvement in major decisions." "Would that work for my parents?" "I don't know. It would mean acknowledging that you're better off here while still maintaining their parental rights. Some parents find that acceptable. Others see it as admitting failure." Friday evening brought the dreaded arrival of Lila's parents, their car loaded with empty suitcases and the expectation of taking their daughter home. The reunion was awkward, filled with the peculiar tension that develops when people who love each other have grown apart due to circumstances beyond anyone's control. "You look wonderful," Lila's mother said, and the surprise in her voice revealed how much she had feared for her daughter's well-being. "Healthy and strong and more confident than when we left you here." "Ray's taking good care of me," Lila replied, though she could see her parents noting the changes in her appearance and demeanor with mixed emotions. Pride in her progress tempered by sadness that it had happened without them. The tour of the farm revealed the extent of Ray's accommodations and adaptations. Her parents examined the accessible bathroom, the modified kitchen workspaces, the garden beds designed specifically for wheelchair use. They met Penny and observed Daisy's obvious devotion to Lila, noting how the animals responded to her with affection and trust. "This is impressive," Lila's father admitted as Ray demonstrated the adaptive gardening tools he had created. "You've thought of everything." "We've learned together," Ray replied. "Lila's taught me as much as I've taught her." That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, the conversation turned inevitably to the future. Lila's parents outlined their improved circumstances, the new job, better insurance, a ground-floor apartment they had found near Lila's old school. "We've been seeing a family counselor," her mother explained, "learning how to cope better with the changes in our lives. We think we're ready to be the parents you need us to be." The words were meant kindly, but they carried an implicit criticism of the arrangement Lila had found so healing. Her parents saw Ray's care as temporary assistance rather than the foundation of a new family structure. "What if I don't want to leave?" Lila asked quietly. The question hung in the evening air like a challenge. Her parents exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for direct resistance to their carefully laid plans. "Sweetheart," her father said gently, "this was always meant to be temporary. Uncle Ray has been wonderful, but we're your parents. You belong with us." "Do I?" Lila's voice carried a strength that surprised everyone present. "I belong where I'm valued for who I am now, not mourned for who I used to be. I belong where my needs are understood and accommodated, not where they're seen as obstacles to overcome." Ray listened to Lila advocate for herself with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. She had grown so much during her months on the farm, developing the confidence to articulate her needs and defend her choices. But he also understood her parents' perspective, their guilt over having needed help, their desire to reclaim their role as primary caregivers. "Let's table this discussion for tonight," Ray suggested. "Everyone's emotional, and big decisions shouldn't be made when feelings are running high." But sleep came fitfully for all of them. Lila lay awake cataloging everything she would lose. If forced to return to her old life, the garden she had planted, the animals who depended on her, the sense of purpose she had discovered in caring for vulnerable creatures. Ray stared at the ceiling, remembering Martha's letters and wondering if he had the right to fight for custody of a child who wasn't biologically his. Saturday morning brought a crisis that crystallized everyone's priorities. Lila's parents had planned to spend the day visiting her old school and meeting with administrators about re-enrollment. But those plans were derailed when Penny failed to appear for her morning feeding. "She's never missed a meal," Lila said, wheeling frantically through the house. "Something's wrong." They found the kitten wedged behind the washing machine, barely conscious and struggling to breathe. Her splinted leg had caught on something during the night, and the resulting panic had exhausted her small body. "Get her to the barn," Ray commanded, his veterinary instincts overriding all other concerns. Now, what followed was an emergency surgery that revealed Ray and Lila's partnership at its most essential level. While Lila's parents watched anxiously from the sidelines, Ray and Lila worked together with the practiced efficiency of a medical team, their communication wordless and intuitive. "Heart rate's dropping," Lila reported, monitoring the tiny patient while Ray prepared surgical instruments. "Increase the oxygen flow," Ray replied, his hand steady despite the gravity of the situation. "And talk to her. She knows your voice." Lila began a soft monologue directed at the unconscious kitten, her words mixing medical observations with gentle encouragement. "Come on, Penny. We're here. Ray's going to fix whatever's wrong, and then you can go back to riding on Daisy's back." The surgery required delicate work to repair internal injuries caused by Penny's struggle to free herself. Ray's hands moved with the precision of decades of experience, But it was Lila's steady assistance and intuitive understanding of his needs that made the procedure possible. "Suture," Ray said, and Lila anticipated his request, handing him the correct instrument before he finished speaking. "Pulse is stabilizing," she reported, her voice calm despite the tears streaming down her face. Lila's parents watched their daughter function as a skilled medical assistant, noting her confidence, competence, and deep emotional investment in the outcome. This wasn't the broken child they had left months ago, but a young woman who had found her calling in the care of vulnerable creatures. "She's gonna be okay," Ray announced finally, his voice thick with relief and exhaustion. "But she need round-the-clock monitoring for the next few days." "I can do that," Lila said immediately. "I'll sleep in the barn if necessary. We'll take shifts," Ray corrected. "Like we did when she first arrived." As they settled Penny into the recovery area, Lila's parents began to understand what they would be asking their daughter to abandon. The barn wasn't just a veterinary clinic. It was a place where Lila had discovered purpose, competence, and the profound satisfaction of using her abilities to preserve life. "You found your calling," Lila's mother said quietly, watching her. Daughter checked Penny's vital signs with professional thoroughness. "I think I have," Lila agreed. "Ray's been teaching me everything he knows about animal care. I want to study veterinary medicine when I'm older, maybe specialize in rehabilitation and adaptive care." That evening, the family held the difficult conversation they had been avoiding. Lila's parents had seen enough to understand that their daughter's growth and healing were deeply connected to the environment Ray had created, the purpose she had discovered, and the relationship she had built. "We want what's best for you," her father said, his voice heavy with the weight of parental sacrifice. "If that means staying here, then we'll find a way to make it work legally." "Are you sure?" Lila asked, hardly daring to hope. "We're sure that trying to force you to leave would be selfish," her mother replied. "You've found something here that we couldn't provide, not because we don't love you, but because we don't have Ray's knowledge and experience. The legal arrangements would be complex, involving formal guardianship papers, custody agreements, and financial responsibilities. But the emotional decision had been made. Lila would remain on the farm, surrounded by the people and animals who had become her chosen family. "There's one condition," Ray said, addressing Lila's parents with the seriousness the situation demanded. "I want you to remain involved in her life. Visit regularly, participate in major decisions, help me make sure she gets the education and opportunities she deserves. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm trying to supplement what you've already given her." "We'd like that," Lila's mother said, tears of relief mixing with grief for the role they were relinquishing. "We want to be part of her life, even if we can't be her primary caregivers." As Sunday evening approached and Lila's parents prepared to return home without their daughter, the weight of the weekend's decision settled over everyone involved. They had navigated one of the most difficult challenges families can face, determining what love looks like when traditional structures aren't sufficient. "I'll call you every week," Lila promised as she hugged her parents goodbye, "and you'll visit for holidays and school breaks. This isn't the end of our family. It's just a different way of being family." "Take care of our girl," Lila's father said to Ray, the words carrying both gratitude and the pain of letting go. "I will," Ray promised. "We'll take care of each other." As the car disappeared down the gravel driveway, Ray and Lila stood together on the porch, surrounded by the animals and landscape that had become the foundation of their new life. The crisis had passed, but it had also clarified something essential about their relationship. They were no longer temporary caretakers for each other, but permanent family bound by choice rather than obligation. "Are you sure about this?" Ray asked, giving Lila one final opportunity to change her mind. "I've never been more sure of anything," Lila replied, reaching over to scratch Daisy's ears as the dog settled beside her wheelchair. "This is home, your family. And tomorrow, We need to check on Penny's recovery. The future stretched ahead of them, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but also with the solid foundation of mutual commitment and shared purpose. They had weathered their first major crisis as a family and emerged stronger, more united, and more certain of their choice to build a life together. The legal papers arrived on a crisp September morning. Official documents that would transform Ray from temporary caretaker to permanent guardian. The process had been more complex than anyone anticipated, involving social workers, psychological evaluations, and endless forms that reduced their emotional journey to checkboxes and signatures. "Are you nervous?" Lila asked as Ray spread the guardianship documents across the kitchen table. "Terrified," Ray admitted, his honesty surprising them both. "Not about having you here, that feels as natural as breathing now, but about making it official, legal, permanent. What if I mess this up? What if I'm too old or too set in my ways to be what you need?" Lila wheeled closer to the table, studying the papers that would legally make them family. "You've already been what I need for months. These papers just make it official." The social worker, Mrs. Chun, had been cautiously optimistic during her final visit the previous week. She had interviewed Ray and Lila separately, toured the house and barn, spoken with neighbors and Lila's doctors. Her report praised the stability and care Ray provided, but also noted the unconventional nature of their arrangement. It's unusual for a single man of Ray's age to seek guardianship of a 12-year-old girl, she had explained during their meeting. "The court will want assurance that you understand the long-term commitment you're making and that you have support systems in place." That support had materialized in ways Ray never expected. Dr. Morrison had written a letter detailing Lila's improved health and emotional state. Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store had organized a petition signed by 37 community members vouching for Ray's character and commitment. Even the veterinarian who had taken over many of Ray's former clients had testified to his professional competence and caring nature. "The whole town is rooting for us," Lila observed, reading through the stack of character references their lawyer had compiled. "Martha would have said that's what small communities do," Ray replied. "They rally around their own when it matters." The court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, a formality according to their lawyer, but one that carried enormous emotional weight for both Ray and Lila. They had prepared for weeks, rehearsing possible questions and gathering documentation. That proved their unconventional family worked. "What if they ask about your age?" Lila worried. "What if they think you're too old to raise a teenager?" "Then I'll tell them the truth," Ray said. "That age brought me patience I didn't have when I was younger, wisdom earned through loss, and enough life experience to know what really matters." The weekend before the hearing brought an unexpected visitor, Lila's former track coach, who had driven 3 hours to see how his star runner was adapting to her new reality. Coach Martinez had been devastated by Lila's accident, feeling responsible, despite the circumstances being completely beyond his control. "I brought you something," he said, presenting Lila with a small wrap package. Inside was a new medal, custom-made, with an inscription that read, "Lila Chun, Champion of Adaptation, Outstanding Achievement in Overcoming Obstacles." "This is beautiful," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I haven't won any races." "You've won something more important," Coach Martinez replied. "You've won your life back. You've found a new way to compete, a new way to excel. That's what champions do. They adapt and overcome." The conversation that followed revealed how much Lila had changed during her months on the farm. She spoke with confidence about her future plans, her interest in veterinary medicine, her sense of purpose in caring for animals. Coach Martinez listened with amazement to the transformation in his former student. "I was worried you'd given up on having goals," he admitted. "But you've just found different goals, haven't you?" "Better goals," Lila said firmly. "Running was something I was good at, but this feels like something I was meant to do." That evening, as they sat on the porch with Daisy and Penny, Ray reflected on the changes the past months had brought to all of them. Daisy had regained her social nature, greeting visitors with enthusiasm and maintaining devoted supervision of Penny's adventures. The kitten had grown into a confident young cat whose slight limp didn't slow her down in the least. "We're quite a collection of rescued creatures," Ray observed. "Maybe that's what family is," Lila replied. "A group of individuals who choose to take care of each other." Tuesday morning arrived gray and overcast, with autumn rain drumming against the farmhouse windows. Ray wore his best suit, the same one he had worn to Martha's funeral, while Lila chose a dress her mother had sent for the occasion. They drove to the courthouse in nervous silence, both aware that their future together hung in the balance of legal proceedings. The courtroom was smaller than Lila had imagined, and less intimidating. Judge Harrison was a woman in her 50s, who had built her career on family law cases involving children in difficult circumstances. She reviewed their file with the thorough attention of someone who understood that decisions made in her courtroom would shape lives for decades to come. "Mr. Thurston," Judge Harrison began, "you're seeking guardianship of a child who is not related to you by blood, despite having no prior experience raising children. Can you explain why you believe this arrangement serves Lila's best interests?" Ray had rehearsed this answer, but when the moment came, he spoke from his heart rather than his preparation. "Your Honor, when Lila first came to my farm, we were both broken in different ways. She had lost her physical abilities and her sense of identity. I had lost my wife and my sense of purpose. Together, we found ways to heal that neither of us could have managed alone." He gestured toward Lila, who sat straight in her wheelchair with the poise of someone much older than her years. "Lila has taught me that families aren't just created by birth or marriage, but by the daily choice to care for each other. She's brought life back to my home, purpose back to my work, and hope back to my future. In return, I've provided her with stability, education in animal care, and the support she needs to thrive despite her physical challenges." Judge Harrison turned to Lila. "And what do you want, young lady? If you could choose your living situation without any consideration of adult complications, what would you choose?" "I would choose to stay with Ray," Lila said without hesitation. "Not because my parents don't love me or because they can't take care of me, but because I've found my calling on the farm. I want to be a veterinarian when I grow up, and Ray is teaching me everything I need to know. More than that, he sees me as capable and valuable, not as someone to be pitied or protected." The judge asked additional questions about education plans, financial stability, and support systems. Ray answered with the careful thoroughness of someone who had considered every aspect of the responsibility he was undertaking. "I've arranged for Lila to continue her education through a combination of homeschooling and part-time attendance at the local high school. She'll have access to advanced science courses that will prepare her for veterinary studies, and she'll gain practical experience through our work with animals. And if Lila decides she wants to pursue different interests as she grows older, then we'll adapt," Ray said simply. "That's what families do. They support each other's dreams, even when those dreams change." After an hour of questions and testimony, Judge Harrison called for a brief recess to review the case files. Ray and Lila waited in the hallway, both trying to read meaning into the judge's expressions and tone. "Whatever happens," Ray said quietly, "I want you to know that these months with you have been the best of my life since Martha died." "Mine too," Lila replied. "Even if the court says no, you'll always be my family." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Harrison had made her decision. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, Judge Harrison began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "I am prepared to grant the petition for guardianship with several conditions." Ray felt his heart stop, then restart with irregular beats that seemed to echo in the quiet courtroom. Beside him, Lila gripped the arms of her wheelchair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Mr. Thurston, you have demonstrated exceptional commitment to Lila's well-being and development. The testimony from community members, medical professionals, and Lila herself paints a picture of a child who has thrived under your care in ways that might not have been possible in a traditional family setting." The judge paused, consulting her notes before continuing. "However, guardianship of a minor is a responsibility that extends well beyond providing a loving home. You will be required to submit quarterly reports to the court detailing Lila's educational progress, medical care, and social development. You must also maintain regular contact with Lila's biological parents and include them in major decisions regarding her welfare." "I understand, Your Honor," Ray managed, his voice steady despite the emotions churning within him. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "Lila will be assigned a court-appointed advocate who will conduct periodic visits to ensure her needs continue to be met appropriately. This arrangement will be reviewed annually until she reaches the age of majority." Ray nodded his agreement to each condition, understanding that the court's caution was necessary protection for Lila's future. The legal system had to ensure that unconventional families could provide the same stability and opportunities as traditional ones. "Lila," the judge addressed her directly, "do you understand that this decision makes Mr. Thurston legally responsible for your care and welfare? That he will have the authority to make decisions about your education, medical treatment, and daily life?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lila replied, her voice clear and confident. "And I understand that I can petition the court if I ever feel my best interests aren't being served." "Very good." Judge Harrison signed the official documents with ceremonial precision. "Congratulations, Mr. Thurston. You are now Lila's legal guardian with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The words seemed to hang in the air, transforming possibility into reality. Ray looked at Lila, seeing tears of joy streaming down her face, and felt his own eyes filling with emotion. They had crossed an invisible threshold from chosen family to legal family, from temporary arrangement to permanent commitment. In the courthouse hallway, their lawyer shook Ray's hand with genuine warmth. "This was one of the most straightforward guardianship cases I've handled," she said. "The court could see how much you both wanted this arrangement to work." "What happens now?" Lila asked, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Now you go home and continue being a family," the lawyer replied. "The legal recognition just makes official what you've already built together." The drive back to the farm passed in comfortable silence, both Ray and Lila lost in contemplation of their new status. The autumn landscape seemed more vivid somehow, as if the legal ceremony had sharpened their perception of the world they shared. "I need to call your parents," Ray said as they pulled into the familiar gravel driveway. "They'll want to know the outcome immediately." The conversation with Lila's parents was emotional but positive. Despite their initial reluctance to permanently relinquish care of their daughter, they had seen enough during their visits to understand that Lila's happiness and development were best served by remaining on the farm. "We're proud of both of you," Lila's mother said when Ray handed the phone to her. "This can't have been easy, but you've both handled it with such maturity and grace." "I love you, Mom," Lila replied. "This doesn't change that. If anything, having stability here makes it easier for me to appreciate what you and Dad gave me before the accident." That evening, the small community that had supported their guardianship petition gathered at the farm for an impromptu celebration. Mrs. Henderson brought a homemade cake decorated with the words, "Welcome to the family." Dr. Morrison arrived with a bottle of sparkling cider and stories about other unconventional families he had known over the years. "Martha would be so happy," Mrs. Patterson said, watching Ray and Lila work together to serve refreshments to their guests. She always said this house was meant to be filled with laughter and the sounds of family life. As the evening progressed, Ray found himself observing the scene with wonder. 6 months ago, he had been a reclusive widower who rarely spoke to his neighbors. Now his home buzzed with conversation and celebration, anchored by the presence of a remarkable young woman who had transformed not just his life, but his entire relationship with the community around him. Speech. Someone called out, and the assembled neighbors turned expectantly toward Ray. He stood awkwardly, unused to being the center of attention, but feeling the weight of gratitude for the support they had provided. "I'm not good with words," he began, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "But I want you all to know how much your support has meant to us. When I took Lila in, I thought I was just providing temporary help to family in crisis. I never imagined that she would give me more than I could ever give her." He looked down at Lila, who beamed up at him with pride and affection. Martha used to say that families aren't just about blood relations. They're about people who choose to care for each other through good times and bad. Today, Lila and I made that choice legal and permanent. But the real commitment was made months ago, the first time we cooked dinner together, the first time we planted seeds in the garden, the first time we saved an injured animal. The room erupted in applause, but Ray wasn't finished. "Thank you for welcoming Lila into this community, for helping her feel valued and supported. Thank you for believing that an old veterinarian could learn to be a guardian. And thank you for showing us both what it means to be surrounded by people who care." As the guests gradually departed, leaving behind warm wishes and promises to stay involved in their lives, Ray and Lila found themselves alone on the porch with Daisy and Penny. The weight of the day's ceremonies had settled into quiet satisfaction. "How does it feel to be officially family?" Ray asked. "Like something that was already true just got recognized by the rest of the world," Lila replied. "Though I admit, having it legal makes me feel more secure." Ray nodded, understanding her need for the stability that official recognition provided. "Tomorrow, we should start working on your high school science credits. If you're serious about veterinary medicine, you'll need advanced courses in biology and chemistry." "I'm serious," Lila confirmed. "More serious than I've ever been about anything." As they prepared for bed that night, both Ray and Lila felt the profound shift that comes with crossing from temporary to permanent, from chosen to legal, from hope to certainty. The guardianship certificate sat on Ray's desk, a formal acknowledgement of the bonds they had forged through shared purpose, mutual care, and the gradual healing of two wounded hearts. In her room, Lila placed the certificate in the same drawer, where she kept her track medal, two artifacts representing different chapters of her life, both important in their own way. The medal honored who she had been. The certificate celebrated who she was becoming. Down the hall, Ray lay in bed thinking about Martha's letters and how perfectly she had predicted this outcome. His wife had known that their childless marriage was preparation for exactly this moment, when a young person would need the accumulated love and wisdom of two people who had spent decades learning how to care for vulnerable creatures. Outside, autumn rain continued to fall, nourishing the dormant garden that would bloom again in spring. Inside the farmhouse, a newly legal family slept peacefully, surrounded by the animals they had rescued and the community that had embraced their unconventional love story. The transformation was complete, but the real work, the daily choice to care for each other, would continue for years to come. 1 year later, on a crisp October morning that mirrored the day Lila had first arrived at the farm, Ray stood in his workshop, putting the finishing touches on a wooden sign. The carved letters read, "Thurston Family Farm Veterinary Services and Animal Rehabilitation," and below that, in smaller script, "Lila Thurston, Assistant." "Do you think it's too presumptuous to include my name?" Lila asked, wheeling her chair through the workshop doorway. At 13, she had grown taller and stronger, her confidence evident in the way she navigated both physical spaces and social situations. "Not presumptuous at all," Ray replied. sanding the final rough edge. "You've earned your place on that sign. Dr. Morrison says you know more about animal care than some of his veterinary students." The past year had brought changes that neither of them could have anticipated. Ray had gradually resumed his veterinary practice, specializing in rehabilitation and adaptive care for animals with disabilities. Lila's natural empathy and growing expertise had made her an invaluable partner, and together they had developed innovative approaches to helping creatures that other vets might have given up on. "Mrs. Patterson is bringing her new puppy this afternoon," Lila reported, consulting the appointment book she now maintained with professional efficiency. "The one born with the deformed front leg. She wants to know if we can fit him with some kind of adaptive device. What do you think?" Ray asked, testing her developing judgment. "I think we start with physical therapy to strengthen the surrounding muscles. Then design a lightweight brace that allows natural movement while providing support. Maybe something with adjustable components so it can grow with him." Ray smiled at her thoughtful response. "Exactly what I was thinking. You want to take the lead on this case? Really?" Lila's eyes lit up with excitement. "You trust me with the primary treatment plan?" "I trust you with anything," Ray replied, and meant it completely. The transformation in their living situation had been equally remarkable. The farmhouse had been fully adapted for accessibility, but more importantly, it had become a true home filled with the comfortable rhythms of family life. Lila's parents visited monthly, and their relationship had evolved into something healthier than it had been before the accident, built on mutual respect rather than obligation, enhanced by distance rather than strained by proximity. "Dad called this morning," Lila said, using the title she had naturally begun applying to Ray. "Mom got the promotion she was hoping for, and they want to plan a celebration dinner when they visit next weekend." The easy way she switched between referring to her biological parents and Ray, as family reflected the complex but functional structure they had created. Her parents remained involved in major decisions and maintained their emotional connection to their daughter, while Ray provided daily care and guidance. It was unconventional, but it worked. "Speaking of celebrations," Ray said, "I have something for you." He reached into his workbench drawer and pulled out a small wrapped package. Inside was a professional nameplate that read, "Lila Thurston, Veterinary Assistant," in elegant gold lettering. "For your desk in the office," Ray explained. "I thought it was time you had official recognition of your role here." Lila held the nameplate with reverence, running her fingers over the raised letters of the surname she now legally carried. "Thurston," she said aloud, still sometimes surprised by the sound of it. "Do you ever regret taking my name instead of hyphenating?" Ray asked. The decision had been Lila's, made after considerable thought about identity and belonging. "Never," Lila replied firmly. "Chun is my history, but Thurston is my future. Besides, it makes things less complicated when people assume we're biologically related." They walked Ray walking, Lila rolling toward the barn where their first patient of the day waited. Three-legged Murphy, a golden retriever who had lost a limb to cancer, was learning to navigate his new reality with the help of Ray and Lila's rehabilitation program. "How's our boy doing today?" Lila asked Murphy's owner, Mrs. Davidson, who had driven 40 miles for the appointment. "Much better. He's not trying to use the missing leg anymore, and his balance has improved dramatically. The exercises you taught us are really helping." Ray watched Lila conduct the examination with professional thoroughness, checking Murphy's muscle tone, joint flexibility, and overall condition. Her bedside manner was exemplary, gentle with the animal, informative with the owner, and confident in her assessments. "I think we can reduce his therapy sessions to once a month," Lila announced after completing her evaluation. "He's adapted beautifully to three-legged mobility. The key now is maintaining muscle strength and monitoring for any compensatory issues." "You agree with that assessment?" Mrs. Davidson asked Ray, still somewhat amazed by the expertise of his young assistant. Completely, Ray confirmed. Lila has an exceptional gift for understanding how animals adapt to physical challenges. I trust her judgment implicitly. As Mrs. Davidson and Murphy left, their happiness evident in the dog's confident gait and the owner's relieved smile, Ray felt the deep satisfaction that came from meaningful work well done. "Remember when you first arrived here?" he asked Lila as they cleaned the examination room. "You were so angry about your limitations, so focused on what you couldn't do anymore." "I remember feeling like my life was over," Lila replied, disinfecting instruments with practiced efficiency, like the accident had erased everything I used to be. "And now?" Lila paused in her work, considering the question seriously. "Now, I understand that the accident didn't erase who I was. It revealed who I was meant to become. I could never have discovered this calling if I had stayed on the path I was on before." That afternoon, as they sat in Martha's memorial rose garden with cups of tea and the satisfaction of a productive day, Ray reflected on the year's journey. The roses Martha had chosen were in full autumn bloom, their fragrance filling the air with sweetness and memory. "I have a confession," he said to Lila. "When you first arrived, I was terrified that I would fail you, that my age and inexperience with children would somehow damage your recovery. And instead, you saved me. You brought purpose back to my life, gave me a reason to care about the future, helped me honor Martha's memory by using the love we had accumulated together." Daisy, now showing her age but still devoted to family supervision, had positioned herself between their chairs. Penny, fully grown and barely showing signs of her early injuries, was stalking leaves that drifted down from the maple tree. The scene epitomized the peaceful domesticity they had created together. "I got a letter from Coach Martinez yesterday," Lila said, pulling an envelope from her jacket pocket. "He's nominating me for a state award for young people who have overcome significant challenges to help others." "That's wonderful. You certainly deserve recognition for everything you've accomplished." "The application asks about my future goals," Lila continued. "I wrote that I want to specialize in veterinary rehabilitation, maybe open a clinic that focuses specifically on helping animals with disabilities and their families." Ray smiled at her ambition. "That sounds like a perfect calling for someone with your combination of empathy and expertise. I also wrote that I want to continue working with you for as long as you'll have me as a partner." "That would be forever," Ray replied without hesitation. As evening approached, and they prepared to go inside, Lila paused at the memorial rose garden to read the plaque Ray had installed among Martha's chosen varieties. It read, "In memory of Martha Thurston, who believed that love multiplies when it's shared, and that healing happens when we help each other grow." "She would be proud of us," Lila said, touching one of the late-blooming roses. "She would be proud." "Of you," Ray corrected. "I think she knew somehow that you were coming. All those years of childlessness, all that accumulated parental love, it was waiting for you." As they made their way into the house, followed by their devoted animal companions, Ray felt the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived and love well shared. The frightened, angry girl who had arrived a year ago had grown into a confident young woman with clear purpose and unlimited potential. The broken-hearted widower who had been merely existing had rediscovered the joy of meaningful work and family connection. Their story had begun with a simple moment, an old dog's gentle approach to a wheelchair-bound child. But that moment had blossomed into something profound, proof that families come in many forms, that healing happens through caring for others, and that the most beautiful lives are often built from the pieces of broken dreams, lovingly reassembled into something even stronger than what came before dawn in the kitchen. As they prepared dinner together using vegetables from their garden and herbs they had dried for winter, the rhythm of their shared life felt as natural as breathing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new animals to help, new opportunities to make a difference in the world. But tonight, in the warm glow of the farmhouse that had become home, Ray and Lila Thurston were simply a family chosen legal and bound by the strongest force in the universe. Love that transforms everyone. It touches,